Hey guys, so this story is more weird than creepy, and definitely traumatized me quite a bit, so I hope you enjoy reading it. Anyway, I, a 19-year-old female, live in a treatment/transition center currently, where I'm learning to recover from substances. So, living here can get pretty interesting at times. We live with a family who is trained in dealing with recovering youth, and the average stay is 3 to 20 days, as it's encouraged to use the home to transition into a more hands-on treatment center. Anyway, the family occupies the upstairs, and the youth live in a basement suite downstairs. There's a lot of privacy, and we have our own kitchen and bathrooms. So, I've had the longest run here at nearly 40 days. In addition, you meet all sorts of people with super interesting and sometimes super volatile personalities. 4 days ago, we got a new intake, and her name was Christine. I didn't get to see her much as I was out with my counselors when she arrived, but the requirement is that we go to a walk-in clinic immediately upon arrival. So, this girl could be Steve Buscemi's doppelganger, just with a huge meth problem. Immediately, she feels the need to tell me about how she wasn't allowed in any of the stores around the walk-in clinic, as she was banned for shoplifting, and how she never paid rent. My response was, okay, well, that's pretty shitty. I kinda felt bad for her, but I figured I'd just ignore her, as we seem to be extremely different people. And plus, I'm not really here to make friends. That's just a bonus. The first night of her visit, I was in the kitchen making my favorite snack, Rice Krispies with melted peanut butter, and I just got this insane feeling that someone was watching me. I turned around, and there was this girl just staring at me. Asking if I could help her merited no response. I was creeped out, but just brushed it off. Encounters like this would happen 3 or 4 times a day. Basically, anytime she heard me in the kitchen, she would rush in and just stare at me. Fucking weird, right? Well, it gets weirder. The second night of her stay, I was in my room browsing Reddit and on Skype with a good friend. The way my door is, and the way the light shines under it, allows me to see when someone is coming via their shadow. So, I'm just happily Redditing away, and I see a shadow under my door. I assume it's my caretaker just checking to see if I'm there, but the shadow doesn't go away. For close to an hour. I knew it was her. I was starting to get really freaked out. This girl was stressing me out so much, and I constantly had to hide all my valuables, because I legitimately felt if I wasn't hiding them, they would vanish. Today, she decided to discharge though, thank goodness. Upon her leaving, she did one last stare down in the kitchen, and then promptly told me to fuck off, and that her male prostitute boyfriend would kick my ass. This was definitely a strange encounter for me, as many strange things don't happen to me, and I doubt that neither I or my caregivers will ever forget it. Back in August, I was hospitalized in the voluntary psychiatric ward at the nearby hospital due to some major anxiety and depression issues. It was unfortunately my second hospitalization in as many months, and this time, they only had room for me in a room with a roommate. No one knows why, but for some reason, when the psychiatric unit was built, they decided to put in rooms for roommates. Because of this, usually only high-functioning people are put into double rooms. Usually. So, I show up, and the nurses all remember me, but most of the patients are different. Stays in psychiatric units nowadays average about 1 or 2 weeks. Because it's the voluntary unit, there's no actively psychotic or violent people. My roommate, Jane, seems nice enough. She was a quiet, plain petite woman. One thing she really liked to do was sit and work on crossword puzzles. In the rooms, each patient gets a desk and a dresser, and our dressers are right next to each other. Each room also has very beautiful photographs in them that are obviously not behind glass. I was admitted to the hospital around 6 p.m. At 9:30 p.m., I had taken my medication and was meditating before going to sleep. I was looking at this beautiful picture of a tree and fence at sunset and focusing on it while slowing my breathing. And then I noticed that there was writing on it. I hadn't noticed the writing earlier. It was in pencil and was put into the picture with enough force to indent it. The writing said, "They are liars. Fucking liars." And some other things that I couldn't make out. It weirded me out a bit, but I figured it'd been there before and had been a previous patient. I went to the nurse's station and let them know. If you've ever been in a psychiatric unit, you'll know it's terribly boring. I spent most days walking around the unit. Some patients actually counted their laps, because about 30 laps equaled a mile, or painting in the art room, or in group. I began to notice that my roommate never went to any groups. In fact, she never left the room. And then I realized that she never left her desk. Each time I came into the room, she would be sitting at the desk, working on a crossword. I figured that was how she dealt with the boredom, and tried to make small talk when I came in and out of the room. Then, I began to realize that the crossword wasn't changing. It was the same crossword, with no progress. The second night I was there, I went to go to bed around 10:30 p.m. When I had woken up that day, she was sitting at her desk, working on the crossword puzzle. And when I came back to go to sleep, she was still working on the crossword with the light on. I shrugged at it because by this point, she was no longer responding to me saying hi or asking if she was going to group. I figured she might be having a medication reaction or just not feel like talking. So I turned off all my lights and pulled the curtain that separated our beds. The medication I was on at the time basically knocked me out, so I was able to fall asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to one of the medical assistants or nurses asking my roommate if she thought it was time to go to bed or turn off her light so that her roommate, me, could sleep. She didn't respond to the person and didn't turn off the light, but I ended up going back to sleep. At some point, she did turn off the light and go to bed. I woke up in darkness again. I had earplugs in, and the medication I was on would literally make me sleep for 12 hours straight, so I was confused. I realized I could hear someone talking. I took my earplug out and realized it was my roommate. She kept repeating, "Jesse, help me. Jesse, help me." I responded, "Jane, are you okay? Jane, are you okay?" She didn't respond, but stopped saying it, so I thought she was talking in her sleep or something, and I went back to sleep. I woke up again at some point, and she was saying the same thing, but louder. I knew that she wasn't talking in her sleep this time. I tried to get her to respond to me, but she never did. She was just semi-yelling, "Jesse, help me! I need help! Jesse!" I got up and got the night nurse, whose name was Jessie, and told her my roommate was calling for her. By the time I came into the room and the nurse came, Jane was hysterical. She was crying out for Jessie and trying to get out of bed. Jessie did her best to calm her, and I was rattled, but given the sedation I was on, I ended up going back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my roommate wasn't in the room, and a table that had been near her bed was in front of the bathroom curtain. No doors because of suicide risk. I went to use the bathroom, and there was an entire roll of toilet paper in the toilet. I went and got a nurse because I didn't want to be the one charged with flooding the bathroom. When I went out onto the floor, I realized two odd things. First, there was a medical assistant sitting at a desk near the door. Second, Jane was also standing at the door. The door only opens when someone phones in, so I was confused as to why there had to be someone essentially guarding the door. I found out from another patient who had insomnia that my roommate had spent the night running around the ward and throwing furniture around. They finally got security down to talk to her, and she calmed down, but then stood in front of the door and was still standing there. Weird, but hey, crazy is as crazy does. I went about my usual routine of eating breakfast and painting. I asked some of the assistants about my roommate, and they tell me she's been standing there since their shift started, around 6 a.m. It was now around 11. I'm a little creeped out, but I just keep painting. I just do abstract watercolors, but I get pretty into it. And then I notice something out of the corner of my eye. I look up, and it's Jane, outside of my room, and staring at me. She sees me look up and looks away, but doesn't move for a good 20 minutes. I get weirded out and decide to go back to my room for the first time that morning. She follows me into the room. I act like I was just picking something up and go to leave again, and go to the assistant sitting in front of the door. I tell her politely that I may sound a little paranoid, but I think my roommate is following me. So she lets me sit with her in front of the door. And because I'm sitting there with nothing to do, I decide to call my insurance company with a question. As I'm on the phone, Jane comes walking up with these 2 plastic bins that are full of stuff. When you're first let onto the unit, they give you a plastic bin with various toiletries. The bins are full of her stuff and my stuff. She also has the pillowcase off my bed that is full of my clothing. I lose it. I start yelling, "Why does she have my stuff? Why does she have my iPad? Who let her do this? That iPad is worth like $800. And I just started hysterically crying. When she came out, there were 3 nurses standing by me, and they're all just flabbergasted. They've never seen anything like this. I'm on the floor crying, and my eyes are closed, and I feel someone kneel down, put their arms around me, and say, "It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay." I assume it's a nurse and open my eyes. It's Jane. I tell her to stop touching me and tell the nurses that I want her away from me. The nurses ended up bringing me into a private meeting room to go through my stuff and tell me that Jane is going to be transferred to the involuntary ward at some point during the day. Unfortunately, due to Jane's behavior, my stuff cannot be put back into the room, and I'm essentially left without a room for most of the day. While this has been going on, Jane has now moved to the back door, which opens up into a stairwell that you go down to get to the garden outside. There were 2 garden times a day where we could go outside. There's no way for her to open it, obviously, and she just stands there for hours. Hours. After a while, I just start ignoring her, even though she stares at me whenever I'm in her line of vision. Around 6 or 7 p.m. that night, my husband and I are playing cards with another patient who had just moved onto our unit so that Jane could be moved upstairs. We were playing in the mailroom, which is the room that Jane was waiting near. As we're playing rummy, we see the psychiatrist come up with 2 security guards. She's explaining to Jane that she has to go upstairs. Jane gets agitated and refuses to move. A security guard goes to take her arm, and Jane gets even more agitated and starts yelling, "No, no, no." When they go to grab her, she turns to the window, starts banging on it, looking straight at me, and screams at me for help. They ended up dragging her, literally kicking and screaming the entire length of the unit upstairs. I was a bit shaken up, but at least she was off the unit. I end up with another roommate, also named Jane, but she is super sweet and in the unit because she's detoxing from some meds she was on while in another unit in the hospital. My attending psychiatrist assures me that my reaction was completely normal to someone having a psychotic break, and I start to feel more comfortable. The next day after lunch, it's garden time. I loved being able to go outside. At the time, I was only allowed 30 minutes with a capable adult. The unit is pretty deep into the hospital, so it would give me and my husband about 10 minutes outside, whereas garden time is 30 minutes. I'm excited, and then see that Jane is one of the people coming on garden time from upstairs. I'm nervous, so I ask the assistants coming out to supervise us if I can sit near them during garden time. And they say it's fine, and everything goes okay. Jane doesn't approach me at all. But when we came back in, I made sure to break off from the group and get away from Jane as soon as possible. Instead of following the assistants and security guards back down the hallway to the front door of the unit, she makes a fucking beeline for my room. I didn't see her again after that, so I think her condition may have deteriorated more, or they may have realized that having her able to access me or my things was probably a bad idea. I got out earlier today. As I note, earlier today when I was at lunch with a friend, I thought I saw her car, and almost freaked me out. The poor lady getting out of the car was so confused as to why I was looking at her with such a look of fear on my face.